We have always been ready to negotiate with the United States to remove the remaining barriers to transatlantic trade. At the same time, we are prepared to respond. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel, and we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail.
David Ignatius, talk to us, if you will, because you work. This is your gig. You work this side of the margin, talking to foreign leaders every day, talking to foreign diplomats every day, talking to foreign thought leaders every day. And talk about, I would suspect there has to be like a 1-2 punch. First, the battle over Ukraine diplomatically, the battle against the EU, the back and forth. And of course, it's important to note that he seems to have fairly positive relations with Keir Starmer, fairly positive relations with Macron right now on a personal level, and some other leaders. But still, a huge disconnect against the EU and other allies across the Pacific. I'm wondering what the 1-2 impact of this is, where, first of all, it's a sort of a divide militarily and diplomatically, and now you have this divide economically.
So, Joe, our allies and trading partners in many respects are the same. China is an exception, huge trading partner. But generally, we have been seen as the leaders of the system that provides security in terms of our overwhelmingly powerful military and the nuclear umbrella we provide for our friends and allies that keeps the world safe. And we've also been seen as the guarantor, manager, in effect, of the global economic and financial system. The Federal Reserve is the dominant voice in every financial capital around the world. The Fed makes an announcement, the whole world immediately responds. So the world is used to our leadership and has prospered, as have we as a country. We forget just how prosperous the United States has been in these decades of declining tariffs. So I think the world fears that as the United States under Trump deliberately moves to break the system in which the United States was leader, there's anxiety about what will come next. And yes, there is the beginnings of exploration of other possibilities. Closer alliance among the European countries and standing separately from the United States on both security and economic policies. New deals with China. China is going to emerge as, in many countries' view, a factor for stability when the United States is moving things up and down. So this is going to be a period in which American leadership is doubted for the simple reason that Donald Trump is walking away from that role, thinks that role has been bad for the country, and we're going to feel significant aftershocks of that. I just note one final thing. In that little clip you showed, Dick Gephardt is talking about tariffs, and he's saying, you know, South Korean trade policy is unfair, but he stresses we will never walk away from the defense of South Korea. No country, responsible country, would ever do that. Well, that's what Donald Trump is moving toward. Not just the economic side, but the security side. That double whammy, I think, has got the world shook up.
I'm not too concerned about Donald Trump not understanding how his tariffs work, because he's Donald Trump. He doesn't understand how to make money running a casino. The important thing is that there are adults in the room, like Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary and college dean, who understands that boys will be boys. That guy's going to have the answers we need.
What do you expect the stock market to look like when it opens tomorrow in reaction to this?
I don't know.
Should we view these as permanent?
That, you know, I think we're going to wait and see how this plays out.
Do you plan on having negotiations before that date?
I just don't know if there are going to be negotiations.
Canada and Mexico notably missing on that chart. Why is that?
I'm not sure.
You know, I have a question. Do you know anything? Why are you out here doing interviews? It's not very reassuring to have the Treasury Secretary of the United States going,
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, not completely comfortable, I think, with this whole tariff thing. I will say we've got jobs numbers out that we're going to be getting to in a second, John. And the White House very pleased with the jobs numbers, though. Doesn't seem like it's moved markets at all. Front page of the Wall Street Journal today, obviously, the big news is markets across the world kind of came crashing down about 5% in the U.S. We'll see what happens today. But that was more than across other countries here. You have the New York Times talking about how the tariffs, here, we'll try that camera, how the tariffs actually sent shockwaves across the globe. Again, the United States market actually, surprisingly, fell more than most of the other major markets. Right now, the futures are showing that we have futures showing that we're down about 900 points, 1,000 points. So we'll see what happens today. If it's another big loss, I suspect, John, there is going to be some pressure on the administration to start their negotiations sooner rather than later, because that'll be, really tough on 401ks. I saw another network who will say is more predisposed to support President Trump, saying, just don't look in your 401ks for a while. Yeah, lots of luck on that. As the host, I'm sure we're going, oh, my God, look at my 401ks. So there we have that. Also in the news, George Clooney getting the star treatment, Weekend Arts. Good night, good luck. Of course, about Murrow and a play that I want to see very soon. And of course, John, all of this news, very, very important. Not as important, though, is what happens at Fenway at 2 o'clock today. It is opening day at Fenway Park.
Talk about burying the lead. It took us till 9:03 a.m.
Took me forever.
Before we got to the fact that Red Sox Fenway home opener this afternoon against the Cardinals. Walker Buehler on the mound. I also really want to see Clooney in that for a couple weeks. Opened last night, limited time, only on Broadway for a few months. But you're right. I mean, the news today is what we saw yesterday. Yesterday was a big day for giant red arrows pointing downward because there was so much trouble in the markets. 401ks, it was a bloodbath on Wall Street. We'll see what happens today when the market opens in 27 minutes. But we did just get news about the March jobs report released moments ago, and it shows that the U.S. Really good. It shows the U.S. added 228,000 jobs last month, well above the 140,000 that economists had expected. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.2%. And this comes against the backdrop of the market plunging yet again ahead of the opening bell and continued reaction to the widespread tariffs levied this week by the Donald Trump administration. Joining us now live from the New York Stock Exchange is NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Christine, thank you for joining us this morning. So tie these things together here. The apprehension there on Wall Street about these tariffs, but a bigger than expected jobs report.
Yeah, all out dread about tariffs, honestly, what it's going to do to business, what it's going to do to economies, what it's going to do to markets. And then you have the backdrop, John, of this durable, resilient American labor market. When you're creating more than 250,000 jobs, that is a great tailwind to have heading into something as unknown as what the president is doing with his tariffs, trying to remake the global system. So the unemployment rate ticking up a little bit. Most economists not too concerned about that. February's number revised down a little bit, watching these numbers, but certainly it just shows you, looking back in the rearview mirror, heading into this potential global trade war, the U.S. economy, the American labor market was still pretty resilient. And I will note to you that there were 4,000 federal jobs lost in that report. That's just the tip of the spear, I think, for what we'll be seeing in the weeks and months ahead, when tens of thousands of federal government workers will start showing up in these numbers. So again, rearview mirror. You don't have DOGE cuts really showing up yet. You don't have tariff impacts yet. It shows you the starting point of the American economy heading into this new phase for the Trump administration.
And that is an important point for those looking at that number and wondering how it could be that high. It's a very strong number, much stronger than most economists expected. But how could it be that high with all the Doge cuts? Those aren't going to really start showing up until the payoffs end maybe 6, 7, 8 months from now. And the bet inside the White House is by that time, those cuts will be absorbed by a growing economy. Let's bring in right now the co-anchor of CNBC Squawk Box and New York Times columnist Andrew Ross Sorkin. You know, Andrew, inside the White House, they were looking for this jobs number, very concerned about it, but also thinking that a strong jobs number might blunt the impact of the futures dropping. It doesn't seem right now to have had any impact. We're still down, you know, about down 1,000 points projected start for the Dow. What are you hearing?
Yeah, but I mean, the truth is there was a moment before these numbers came out where the Dow was off 1,500 points. So this has
okay. So there you go. That did adjust.
Again, all on the margins. It's all on the margins. We're still down, opening down 1,000 points on the Dow on the back of this news. I think the big question is you have this economy that does look stronger, that may give the administration a little bit more confidence in its own program. But at the same time, you have the Chinese starting their own retaliatory efforts as it relates to these tariffs. And the question is that an open invitation for the EU and every other country around the world to retaliate as well? And to the extent that Trump is going to look at some point for an off-ramp or some form of a negotiation, when does that begin? Does he have confidence because of these numbers? Does he not? And then to throw two other pieces on top of this, there's the question of what the Federal Reserve is going to do. So before the jobs number was announced this morning, there was a sense that the Federal Reserve might try to lower rates to blunt the impact of the tariff situation. Well, if the economy is as strong as it is, it's harder for them to do that. So there's sort of all of these different dynamics at play that are push-pulling each other. And politically, the question is where the president sits and how, whether he's going to ultimately hold steady on these tariffs or whether it really is a negotiation. I'll tell you, it's something we've talked about every day on this broadcast. Every CEO is trying to figure out whether these tariffs are going to be here in a week, in 6 months, in a year, and more importantly, in 3 and 5 years from now. Because that, whatever that is ultimately going to determine whether they actually bring manufacturing back to America or not. And they're going to play chicken until there is some certainty around that.
And right now, everything is frozen. You know, Andrew, you look at the numbers, the jobs numbers, and how hot the economy was this past month as it pertains to jobs. For people that are hoping for some sort of relief with mortgage rates, for credit card interest rates, they're not going to probably get that now, are they?
A little bit harder, but I'll tell you, the 10-year note has fallen, but it's fallen for the wrong reasons. By the way, gas prices are falling, but they're falling for the wrong reasons, which is to say gas will cost less. But the reason it's going to cost less is because there's a prediction right now that we are closer to a recession than not, and therefore there's going to be less need, frankly, for gas. So, look, these are sort of the economic push-pulls of what's happening here, and I think it's going to take a little bit of time to see how it all plays out. Meanwhile, you have both Democrats and now increasingly, I think I'm hearing, at least from some Republicans, who are saying that they do want to put some pressure on this administration to negotiate. So how quickly does that all happen?
Yeah, and you know, John, we were talking yesterday about tech stocks getting absolutely pounded. I'll tell you what else got pounded. The price of oil, Brent crude, down to about $65 just per gallon. You start getting into that range, you have a lot of people in Texas and in oil-producing areas starting to get very nervous. And that is, again, we saw prices sink, gas prices sink, price of oil collapse during COVID, got down very low in a way that could cause a recession in those areas. We're getting down there. It's, again, 65. Ended at 65 yesterday, off 6 percentage points. Be interesting to see what happens today.
Yeah, it certainly will be. There's very few sectors right now that aren't feeling this pain. But Christine, right now, at least publicly, the president's saying he's staying the course. I'm going to read to you a pair of Truth Social posts. One just went up 30 seconds ago, both in all caps. This one says, great job numbers, far better than expected. It's already working. Hang tough, we can't lose. And perhaps more tellingly, a short time ago, before the jobs report came out, he said to the many investors coming in the U.S. and investing massive amounts of money, my policies will never change. He goes on to say this is a great time to get rich. But I want to underscore that line to you, Christine, and get your reaction there, what you think the reaction will be from the people behind you. My policies will never change.
Well, that means they think that he's not going to negotiate, even though yesterday he said maybe he would negotiate. So, again, this is all sort of Donald Trump art of the deal stuff. In terms of always being rich, I mean, $2 trillion in stock market value was lost yesterday, and you're going to lose another big chunk of it today. So value is being lost as we speak here. The question is, the White House, the White House has been talking about the 10-year note yield, is kind of looking at that, not the stock market. They've really tried to decouple themselves from the stock market. And that 10-year note yield falling below 4%, that could give relief in mortgage rates, for example. The mortgage rates are tied to the 10-year note yield. But are you going to see people really moving and buying homes for lower mortgage rates if their 401k is down 10% in just a matter of days? I don't think so, right? So you have this, again, exactly what Andrew said, this push-pull in the economy, which just kind of it just leads to a defensive crouch for consumers, for investors, and for business leaders, and that's not good. That's why these expectations or these forecasts are more likely a recession than not at this point.
Busy day ahead for both NBC's Christine Romans and CNBC's Andrew Ross Sorkin. Our thanks to you both. We should also note that later today, Andrew will be marking the 50th anniversary of Microsoft. That's why he's out in Seattle, by sitting down for an exclusive interview with its CEO, Satya Nadella, live at 2:30 p.m. Eastern over on CNBC. And joining us now, we have member of the New York Times editorial board, Mara Gay, and New York Times opinion columnist David French. Our thanks to you both for being here. Mara, I'll start with you. Obviously that conversation there rightly centered around numbers, about Wall Street, about even CEOs. But let's not lose sight of the fact that it's everyday Americans who are going to bear the brunt of this, whether it's because they're seeing their 401ks evaporate in real time, or perhaps as soon as a matter of days, they're going to be paying a lot more for the things they want to buy.
Yeah, I mean, it is good news that we added 228,000 jobs to the economy. But again, that news is delayed, and many Americans are not feeling that. What they are feeling is great uncertainty about their ability to retire, about their ability to find jobs, and about their ability to even buy homes. I mean, we're looking at a situation where prices are up, rent is up, mortgage rates remain high, and the joblessness rate is also higher than it should be. And so actually Americans aren't really feeling very bullish. We had a story the other day about how Americans can't afford the cost of eggs for Easter eggs, so they're actually using potatoes and dyeing those instead. I mean, that is not exactly a reflection of an economy that has Americans feeling confident. And I think the question politically for Donald Trump is, for someone who arguably won this election, which was decisive, as it was a decisive victory, but it was close, won this election based on, the economy and inflation, how is this going to affect the midterms? How is this going to affect his approval rating? And are Americans going to kind of get fed up and really start to grumble in areas where maybe they were willing to give Donald Trump a little bit more leeway? I wonder, especially now that we haven't seen these numbers don't yet reflect the tariffs, and they don't reflect the cuts in Washington that are also going to, by the way, reverberate. We're talking about federal workforce across the country, not just in Washington, D.C. I'm concerned.
Yeah, I've got to say, David French, it was awfully rich yesterday. The same people that were lecturing me because I was talking about such grand ideas during the campaign as democracy and violent rhetoric and the threat of fascism instead of the price of eggs and gas, were the ones yesterday saying, don't look at your retirement account. Don't worry about the price of cars. Don't worry about the price of housings. Don't worry about the price of things that you buy at Walmart. Were the ones yesterday saying, Don't look at your retirement account. Don't worry about the price of cars. Don't worry about the price of housings. Don't worry about the price of things that you buy at Walmart. Nothing to see here. Move along, move along. I don't know. I think, first of all, I see a tail in the background there. Is that your dog?
I had a little visitor come in the back, Joe, unexpectedly. But he's very friendly.
With any luck, he'll jump up on your lap and it'll make TV history. But yeah, very funny that the same people that were scolding you, people like you and me, for not focusing on the price of eggs and butter, are now the ones that are saying, don't worry about your retirement accounts. Don't look at your 401ks for a couple of months. Don't worry about the price of cars. Basically, don't worry, be happy. I don't know that works in middle America.
No. And, if you scratch below the surface here, Joe, you've got something going on here that's even darker. Trump has this almost religious commitment to tariffs. He thinks it's a magic economic and taxation elixir. But he has people behind him who have a fully formed ideology that is almost what you might call right-wing degrowth, that they actually want Americans to be less focused on stuff, which is a totally fine argument to make culturally. In other words, hey, maybe we should be less consumer interested, less interested in big houses and mini cars. I mean, sure, fine. Make that as an argument about a simpler life. But to sort of force Americans into a simpler life, force Americans into less and less and less, is something that is really brand new in sort of Republican circles. But there is a real, actual Republican, what you might call degrowth movement that is directly contradictory to Republican emphasis on economic growth and economic opportunity. Many people behind one layer behind Trump want Americans to live different kinds of lives, and they'll use the government to force that on us. And I do not think Americans, especially working class Americans who are much more price sensitive than the extraordinarily wealthy people who are hosting Fox News shows or close to Trump in the government, they'll be fine. They'll be fine. But they're trying to force a more limited life on Americans and telling them that's what's good for them. And then meanwhile, Trump is just in his own economic, he's in his own economic la-la land where tariffs are the solution to almost any international problem, almost any domestic problem. So we've got this combination of delusion and ideology that is driving this moment, and it's going to hit, sadly, it's going to hit hardest many members of Trump's base who were most economically distressed going into the 2024 election.
Some radical left judges have stepped in and said you're not allowed to deport MS-13 gang members. That's crazy. We think the Supreme Court's going to overrule it, and we're going to keep on fighting for the president's prerogative to enforce the law. We do not ask permission from far left Democrats before we deport illegal immigrants. We do the American people's business. And again, for the American people who are watching, this is such a weird, mistaken placement of priorities. We need to make our country stronger. We need to create jobs. We need to make our streets safer.
I just got to say, John, I know you're going to read a take from Andy McCarthy on, again, how troubling it is that you have a vice president who would say, ignore the courts. I do have to say, though, just fact check here. What he just said was just not true. When he said there are radical left judges who don't want gang members deported, that is not the issue here. It's never been the issue here. You only have those, quote, radical left judges, by the way, doing what judges in West Texas did to Biden for years, stopping a president's actions. And what they're asking for are facts. Because the vice president and other people inside the administration want us to presume, because the people on those flights
actually about tariffs. It's about other countries not buying enough of our stuff. Although Howard Lutnick Commerce Secretary and cologne sponge, had another way to put it.
I mean, the European Union won't take chicken from America. They won't take lobsters from America. They hate our beef because our beef is beautiful and theirs is weak. It's unbelievable. We can't sell corn to India. We can't sell rice to Asia.
Yeah, although I'm not sure tariffs are the reason we can't sell rice to Asia. I think they figured rice out about 10,000 years ago. Now, if they want to add aroni, well, then let us know.
The Daily Show last night. But this morning, the markets have opened with major losses after news that China has announced retaliatory tariffs on 34% on all U.S. goods, set to kick in next week on April 10th. Just moments ago, President Trump, he's busy on Truth Social this morning. He just posted there in all caps, writing, "China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they cannot afford to do." Joining us now, NBC News senior business analyst and host of the 11th Hour, our friend Stephanie Ruhle. Steph, so much to get to, but let's just start there with the China piece of this. To repeat, about 2 hours back, they announced their retaliatory tariffs, 34%. Now we have President Trump weighing in, claiming that they played it wrong. What do you think?
Played it wrong in all caps. This is not a game. Nobody wins in a trade war. And this is sort of this thing that the president likes to say, I don't like what China's doing. Nobody's winning. And the president's lack of understanding with how trade works. What have we seen in the last 2 months? We've seen our allies like South Korea and Japan start to move closer to China in trading agreements and the United States further away. What's stunning to me, in the last 48 hours, I have reached out to so many people in the Trump universe, business people who have supported President Trump. And Jonathan, I cannot find one single investor with one single argument that makes sense for these tariffs. All I'm getting is, well, this is what the president thinks. This is what he's always wanted to do. And because he's the president, let's give him some time. There is no rational argument that any credible economist has given why this works. The argument is that they're trying to reshuffle world order, that we should change how consumerism works here. The United States is not a country that's focused on long-termism. Remember when the Biden administration tried to say that inflation was transitory, i.e. short-term, and nobody was having it because they're saying, I can't afford my rent, I can't afford eggs, I can't afford bacon. Well, now here we have an administration, a Treasury Secretary saying, cool your jets. We're going to have short-term pain for long-term solutions, and not one person has laid out a long-term solution for us.
Boy, it's so important that you bring up the fact that the Biden administration was late on figuring out just how dangerous inflation would be to working Americans. And again, said it was transitory. It ended up not being transitory. But Steph, it's very interesting. You bring up the Treasury Secretary, who, again, a couple of weeks ago said, cheap goods, affordable goods, not a God-given right for American consumers. And then saying yesterday, well, other countries shouldn't push back against these high tariffs. They're just going to do that. And we showed some clips of Scott Bessent. He looked very uncomfortable. And I suspect it's because neither he nor many of the people who are advising the president, and certainly not those on Wall Street supporting him, actually agree with the president on tariffs. I mean, Donald Trump stands almost completely alone in believing that he can reorder 45 years of globalism.
Bingo, Joe. My sources say that Scott Bessent is kind of the odd man out here. And in the inner circle that Trump has, he's not even close to Scott Bessent or listening to him. Some have said to me he's looking for an exit door to try to get himself to the Fed, because in the last few days, he's really hurting his own credibility and history in the markets. Those who have said this man actually understands how the markets work, and what's happening right now is only going to hurt markets. And even for Scott Bessent to say a few weeks ago, getting cheap goods fast is not part of the American dream. No, it's not part of the American dream, but it's part of the way Americans live, especially people who are economically vulnerable. They don't have the option to say, nope, I like higher things that cost more. They need low-cost things because they don't make that much money.
Let's bring in right now Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He's a member of the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. And Senator, you were, of course, a sponsor of a bill that actually passed the Senate with the help of 4 Republicans to kind of pull back, to claw back those tariffs on Canada. What's going on with that, and what other countries are you looking at?
Joe, great to be on with you this morning. Yes, we had a vote 2 days ago, and we got 4 Republicans and every Democrat to challenge Donald Trump's unnecessary Canada tariffs. He declared an emergency under a specious pretext to put these 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, and the Senate rejected him on it. The first time that the Republicans have joined us to push back against Donald Trump's policies. We're now in the House trying to get it passed, but events have taken over. Donald Trump has now levied tariffs against the entire world, taxes against American consumers, a national sales tax, and you're going to see us challenge those Wednesday, Day of Liberation tariffs as well. Likely we'll file next week.
So, Senator, good morning. I mean, the words global trade war have been bandied about the last 48 hours or so. What are your concerns about exactly that? And it's not just that President Trump is levying tariffs against a rival like China, but also so many of our allies. What does that do for our alliances and national security?
Well, why pick a fight with an ally? We need to link arms with allies. And the president's juvenile actions toward Canada, calling him the 51st state, calling the prime minister governor, have been just embarrassing and juvenile. But now he's levying heavy tariffs against South Korea and Japan. And I'm sure you all noted that they had discussions with China this week about forging closer trade alliances and a free trade agreement. We don't want our allies deciding that China is a more reliable partner than the United States. Are you kidding me? And so that's the concern. And then the concern is really right at home. I talk to Virginians all the time. They remember Donald Trump's tariffs from his first term. It hurt Virginians. It especially hurt Virginia agriculture. And these tariffs are at a much greater level than the first term tariffs. So we've got all kinds of farmers and foresters and those who make or use agricultural products. 35% of the aluminum and steel that go into ships and subs we build in this country come from Canada. That's becoming more expensive, which is going to weaken our national security. It's time to quit going after allies. Let's link arms with allies and face off against adversaries rather than the reverse.
Democratic Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, we know you have to run, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. And as we go to break, here is Secretary of State Marco Rubio at a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels earlier today, a short time ago, expressing confidence that markets would recalibrate amid the global sell-off.
Businesses around the world, including in trade and global trade, they just need to know what the rules are. Once they know what the rules are, they will adjust to those rules. So I don't think it's fair to say economies are crashing. Markets are crashing because markets are based on the stock value of companies who today are embedded in modes of production that are bad for the United States. We have to be a country that thinks we're the largest consumer market in the world, and yet the only thing we export is services. And we need to stop that. We need to get back to a time where we're a country that can make things, and to do that, we have to reset the global order of trade.
Welcome back. I want to get to a couple more important stories this morning. First, the Pentagon's acting inspector general has announced an investigation into Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's role in the Signal messaging app incident, where top national security officials mistakenly added a journalist to a discussion revealing attack plans in Yemen. Multiple outlets obtained the memo written by the acting IG. The move would contradict comments made on Monday by White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, who said the case was closed. Meanwhile, President Trump has fired multiple top national security officials. The director and number 2 official at the NSA were ousted yesterday, along with 3 National Security Council members. While no reason was immediately given, the wave of firings followed an Oval Office meeting on Wednesday between Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, as well as far-right activist and conspiracy theorist Laura Loomer. In that meeting, Loomer reportedly expressed her dissatisfaction with some officials on Trump's national security team, calling them disloyal. That's according to 3 people familiar with the matter who all spoke to NBC News. When asked by reporters about this, Trump denied that Loomer had anything to do with the National Security Council staffers who were fired. I will note, though, that some Trump staffers continue to be mystified at the hold that Loomer has over Trump. We saw it during the campaign and potentially again now. All right, we'll be right back with more Morning Joe.
So if a picture paints 1,000 words, Drudge, as usual. Top of the headline, a battered and bruised American dollar. Of course, the dollar losing a lot of ground yesterday. But Jonathan, also this morning, market's down about 1,100, but the president remaining defiant. He says he's going to see this all the way through.
President remaining defiant. And we should note, Mara, that as the markets continue to melt down, fears of global trade war, President Trump is on a long weekend playing golf. He flew to Mar-a-Lago last night. He will remain in Florida today, all weekend long, for a couple golf events and a fundraiser tomorrow night. But certainly a lot of those Republicans we're hearing from on Capitol Hill starting to get worried.
Yeah, they are starting to get worried. They've already been told not to have those town halls with their constituents. But, you know, you think about those images from the town halls they did have a few weeks back, and that was before this trade war. That was before the unemployment rate started ticking up. And I think that the scene of Trump golfing as Americans are dying potatoes instead of Easter eggs is one that the president, may not want.